Extraordinarily enough, I think that the most powerful of his non-fiction works is one in which that didn't happen at all in one sense, and in another sense it happened perfectly, and that is A Grief Observed. It was a stream of consciousness. It was something which his mind was doing. He was writing a journal of his own grief after my mother's death, and he was writing it from the soul. He wasn't working out how to write each phrase as he would normally do. So what we get in A Grief Observed is the real, raw man exposed bleeding to the public. It was a book, incidentally, which he didn't write originally for publication at all. It was his own journal of his grief, which he wrote in order to understand what was happening to him and in order to try to cope with it. And in fact, it was a friend of his, Roger Lanston Green, who was also a friend of my mother's, who came to visit us shortly after her death to see how Jack was doing. And he asked Jack how he was, and Jack said, well, of course, Roger, I've turned to pen and ink as I always do in difficult times. And I've kept a journal of what's been happening inside myself. And Roger asked permission to read it. And having read it, said, you know, Jack, you've got to publish this. It'll help so many people who are about to be bereaved or have just been bereaved. So the funny part about it is that Jack then sent it off to his literary agent, Spencer Curtis Brown in London, with the instructions that it should be submitted to a publisher whom he'd never used before, and under a pen name, which he wrote, Dimidius is his pen name, which means cut in half. And on the board of Faber, the publisher to whom it was sent at the time, was T.S. Eliot, a friend of Jack's. And Eliot read this thing and said, we've got to publish it. But he went back to Spencer and said, but I'm pretty sure I've guessed who the author is. I'd like to suggest you use a less, definitive pen name. So it was originally published under the title of A Grief Observed by N.W. Clark, which is Anglo-Saxon Nat Will Clark, meaning no one knows the writer. And of course, Jack's friends, going through bookshops, seeing this new book by N.W. Clark on the stand, would pick it up and browse it and say, this would help Jack. And they sent him copies. So we had the thing all over the house. But it's an interesting book to me, particularly because it's not an example of how Jack's conscious mind worked to produce a piece of literature. It's an example of how Jack's own inward mind worked on a problem. And for me, it's one of the most powerful works he ever wrote. I think other non-fiction works to display his intellect at work voluntarily would probably be Mere Christianity, Screwtape Letters, and The Great Divorce. I don't think they can be beaten by any writer who's been writing before or since. I think it's a lovely poetic phrase which means practically nothing. Jack's virtues never bled out of him. He kept them till the day he died and exercised them till the day he died. Jack on his deathbed was a man of humour and charity. He was a man of great compassion while he was dying. So I don't really go along with the statement that his virtues bled out of his pen. But I think I know what they're trying to say. I think that the author of that particular remark is probably trying to point out that the greatness of Jack's character is exemplified in his writings. And I think that should be true of any writer of any worth. Of course, it works the other way for writers who do not have character, for writers who do not support the right things but chase the wrong things. Their evil and their own wickedness and their own failings equally pour through the pen onto the page. I think he did, yes. In fact, he appears in one of his own books. He appears in Perelandra as Lewis, as himself, dispatching or helping to dispatch ransom to the planet of Perelandra after he returned from Malacandra. But yes, there are characters in Jack's works that are based largely on himself, and you can tell them because they are the characters showing the most conspicuous faults. If you read the books that Jack writes and find someone who has some pretty glaring faults, and then you read of Jack's life stories honestly told by a variety of biographers, because there are an awful lot of biographers who've told them dishonestly, you'll find the same faults in some of his characters Jack had in a much more minor way. But Jack was very, very strict with himself. What we might have thought of as very, very mild problems, he would regard as serious infractions.